Good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen, and all my NB friends. Thank you for tuning in to KGNU on this fine Friday afternoon. My name is Astin, and you are listening to Sacred Voices on KGNU. Sacred Voices is an indigenous poetry and spoken word organization. We put on an open mic every month for members of the community to share their voice. We also have workshops that are youth-focused. We go around to local schools in the community. Today, for our show, I have our guest as Franklin Cruz. He is the host of our open mic every month. Franklin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing real good. I have a good downtown view out the window.
Yeah, we're in a different location than usual, and we have a nice little view in our studio here today. So, Franklin, there is a lot about you. You do a lot. You're kind of a man about town. Every time I talk with somebody and mention you and you come up, they always have something to say. They always know who you are. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you do? What are all the aspects of you?
Oh, yeah, that's a fun question. So I am a poet. I've been here in Denver's poetry scene since I was 19, but I've been writing since I was like in 5th grade. I'm also a science communicator, meaning that I learn a lot about science, I teach about science, and it's my job to communicate science to people to make it less of a burden or less of a barrier in their lives and more of a connection and a bridge. I'm also an MC. I host shows, so I'll host hip-hop battles, I'll host shows for the DCPA, I'll host conferences to MCing type of situations, and then just an artist, basically, but wearing all those different hats tends to put me in a lot of different spaces in Denver.
I see. One of the things that I know you most for is the thing that I get to see you do at every open mic, and the one that you did at this previous one is that you have the unique ability to freestyle a poem on the spot. Mm-hmm. You basically pull these words out of your head from nothing and are able to create a collage of words that creates just a great poem from nothing. How did you unlock the ability to do that for yourself?
Yeah, so I was actually talking to a friend the other day. They're another poet here in the city, and they were reflecting on like when they first saw me do it, and how bad it was. I'm not gonna lie. Like when I first started freestyling poems, I know a lot of people and a lot of my poet friends would cringe because it was like really bad. But they said something that was really resonant was that's what it took. Like it took months and months and like multiple occasions of in public being really bad and not making a single good connection, not building a single good metaphor, not having a coherent storyline through the whole thing, no build, no nothing, flat poetry, right? Like a line. Mm-hmm. And when you're, like you said, if you're trying to make a collage, a line is not a collage. Mm-hmm. So I think like any artist coming up, relearn how to be a novice. And in that process, having to learn what it is to get intuition again for this specific style. Because I had intuition for writing already. Like I can write a poem, but that's because that's a whole different modality. I get to sit there, think about the words. I have time. There's no risk to it because the risk is correctable. But with freestyling, like the risk is so high. There is no correction available for you. Everything that you say will exist. If it's a mistake, you can take a different direction and lead towards a line that actually works, but the mistake is still there. Like you don't get to erase it, which happens sometimes. I'll mess up words or something like that, and you just have to catch it and keep running. Yeah. But the stumble will be present for everyone. And I think with improvisation, I learned how to make stumbles fair and human. And really just be like, yeah, I made that mistake, but it's okay because the rest of the poem is still coherent.
Gotcha. I think I have a better feel as to the draw of it and why you do it and why you keep doing it. Mm-hmm. So another dive into your philosophy. You talk a lot in the interludes of the open mic. And you have thoughts about ancestors a lot of the time, and you talk about the importance of your connection with your past, like your body memory. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think as an MC, especially at poetry venues, it's our task to be the connective tissue between all the poets and the message of the organization. I always am able to connect it back to the ancestors, mainly because that's one of the purposes of Sacred Voices. That sacredness comes from the fact that this style of storytelling is not new. It's something that we can connect to any culture, regardless. Storytelling was history keeping at one point, and so every culture kept its history orally at one point in time. So for me, it's easy to talk about the ancestors. I do it in my everyday life, but here particularly, it's really easy because what we do is so directly connected to those ancestors and the stories and the information that we have today. But the other one too is like that feeling is also as much as part of that as the writing is and the history keeping, the coming together and having that like exhilaration from someone doing a really good metaphor that really communicates a thought that would otherwise be too complex to understand. Like that feeling is as ancestral as the practice is. And that there's things that happen to us physiologically when we have that. In the same way that like people can experience abuse and trauma from emotion as they can from the physicality of it, I feel like people can also experience inspiration and connection from the emotion, or from the like emotion about it, like being in a room full of people and you're just like, oh my God, my friends are here and this is a really wonderful community space, and like as much as it is getting up there and sharing a poem.
Right. So let's shift to another specific topic. I think I've heard you talk a few different times about masculinity in your poems or reflections on other people's poems. It's a concept that comes up a lot in today's day and age, and a few different times on this show even. The general thought that masculinity is changing and that it's not the same as it was before, and that it kind of has to evolve into something new. What to you is that new masculinity?
For me, I think that masculinity is right now returning more to that indigenous era of the fluidity behind a lot of it. And I think that's what a lot of us are calling into. This idea that, for one, multiple people would agree with me that they feel both masculine and feminine at many times, And I feel like anytime anyone tries to look pretty, for whatever reason, it could be for work, for a date, for yourself, you're accessing your femininity. Whenever you have to push past like a lot of barriers, I feel like a lot of, at least for me in my perception, a lot of us access our masculinity, But in the same way, like I would have a bias because I am a masculine person to say that pushing past the barriers is a masculine trait, when I would argue that anybody else who is feminine could say, oh yeah, but femininity has to do the same thing. You know? And so I think when I start really trying to like get into the nitty gritty of what is masculinity, half the time I can't. Yeah. Because I can't even find something that is so uniquely masculine other than just physical traits. Yeah. And pretty much like being a sperm carrier, that wouldn't be definable by femininity. And so I think a lot of people get upset with that because a lot of people have centralized their identity around masculinity. But a lot of that has been by isolating certain traits as only masculine, and then creating these distilled versions of them. Like power isn't just masculine. I've seen like feminine people with the exact amount of power as any person who is masculine. And that kind of quality is just different. And I feel like when we try to get any closer to that different as masculine people, or moving that definition closer to like almost ambiguous, can't tell a difference between the two, people are just upset because we're moving their identity. Yeah.
That's what makes it a difficult question, but also an interesting conversation starting question that I like to ask, because there's no real answer. Like you said, anything that is considered masculine could easily be adopted by a feminine person. It's not, nobody owns any real specific traits. It's hard to say. But there is a definite movement in a lot of masculine people nowadays to, change what has been viewed in the past as toxic masculinity, to get rid of that and to adopt something new. So
yeah, because I think I saw this really, really good article today of toxicity. And even within the masculine community, I find that like a lot of us arguably do carry toxic masculinity. But I also believe in different gradients. And I feel like a lot of us, it's not necessarily the most toxic behavior, but it's like unhealthy behavior that can easily become toxic.
Yeah.
Toxic for me is like the true deep emotional abuse, the true deep physical abuse. And I think a lot of us are victims of that and perpetuate the standard of it without necessarily perpetuating the inherent abuse within it. Like, we don't necessarily see as many people beating their children anymore because we've learned that physical violence is like a horrible thing. And so like now I remember when I was younger and doing things that were feminine and doing them so repeatedly that I would get like spankings or something like that. And now it's not necessarily a thing to happen, but we still see people buying toys that are like guns for boys and dolls for girls. And so in that way, like we have removed ourselves from the toxicity of it, but there's still an unhealthy way where like you could easily revert back to that toxicity.
Yeah.
And so I think what I hope that people understand with like toxic masculinity especially is that like we are calling out all unhealthy behaviors from the smallest to the most severe, and that a lot of men get caught into that. And so just because you're not like out there calling people names and slapping girls all over the place doesn't necessarily mean that you're not contributing to the problem, because if you still within a whole bunch of boys or guys talk about girls in ways that are objects, you're not slapping them, but like you're creating the circumstance where if anyone should, it's not going to be too out of place, because the unhealthiness can always turn into toxicity.
Yeah, the goalpost has moved basically. It's no longer like don't hit people, it's don't perpetuate a misogynistic culture that underlies your conversations or whatever.
Yeah, because the hitting came from the fact that like we were able to objectify and remove people's humanity from it. It's like the symptom of the fact that like this idea came from you don't see that person as a person. Therefore, you are allowed to hit them because you don't hit people, but that's not a person.
Right. That's a great way of putting that. So let's talk more about your poetry. What have you been working on lately? What is out there in the world right now that is really speaking to you? I know that your freestyle, you were talking about climate change in particular. Have you been looking at what's going on in Australia, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think poetry wise and how it connects to like my environmental work too. One of my like biggest teachers, her name is Lady Speech and Utimia. They always say that like whenever you're doing your art, it is also prayer. So half the time when I'm freestyling, I'll eventually make some natural metaphor. I always tell people that my biggest three tropes are nature, family, spirity stuff. So whenever I'm doing any kind of freestyle, it's guaranteed that one of those things is going to pop in. And lately, it's obviously been a lot of the environment, because with the burnings that are happening in Australia, the ones that happened they're still happening to some extent, but in the Amazon, Borneo, Africa, like a whole bunch of places, which is all the result of the climate change crisis. Like this has been called out for the past 10 decades that we're going to have really, really horrible situations like that. The cool thing I've seen is not only poets, but also dancers, musicians, artists making benefit shows for the Australia at the current moment. Like they make benefit shows for the Amazon as well. But just to like get people who are continents away to be able to send funds over to the people there who directly can make an impact, whether it be buying more like shelter space for people, renting out basketball gyms and whatnot, sending materials, buying or paying salaries for firefighter workers to stay out even longer, shipping in water. Like I think a lot of the artist community has come in a beautiful way to help in that situation. Me personally, I think a lot of my writing right now is just spoken, is just freestyle. It is just getting up there. I do a lot of Instagram posts as well. Like I have an Instagram profile where my aim is to write the shortest things available, because every other time I can speak for 3 minutes, which ends up being about 3 pages if you transcribe it.
Right.
And so I try to make sure I practice, being succinct as much as I practice really elaborating things.
Right.
One of my favorite quotes that I got from a retreat I did was, even if you're not writing, you're always writing. And that has helped me a lot because living life is writing. It allows me to connect to things so that when I write, I can reflect in new ways. When I'm dancing, I'm also writing because as much as I practice that art, that's going to inform me to be able to feel more, which is going to inform my writing. Even when I'm resting, that's just replenishing so that I can write. So a lot of it has been less about the actual practice of writing and more about building myself as a writer.
Right. That's that's an interesting way of looking at, living your life. And I think living as a writer, it's helpful in a healthy way to view your artistic career as sort of like a nonstop continuum of writing like that. I think that helps out. Going back to one point you made about artists helping out by, sending aid to the people who can actually use it in these places, like in Australia and in Africa and in the Amazon and whatever. You also made a poem in the freestyle at the last open mic I heard where you were saying like, supporting the right people when you're buying like the right shampoo or something, or the right palm oil, coming from the right plantations and stuff. And I mean, generally it's my belief that the responsibility is on the big corporations who are doing the wrong things, wronging the people and whatever. But it is important to, as a consumer, as somebody who is, concerned with these things, to make the right choices when you're doing the little things like that, because they can even have a big difference, like you were saying.
Well, I think I always think about my family who's in Mexico, and like right now the US dollar is equivalent to 17 pesos. And so to us, like $5, it really like is nominal when you think about how much money US citizens spend on a regular basis on things that aren't necessarily like important or prioritized in their life as much as they think they are. And so, yes, like you may be buying, in that example I was talking about like shampoo or conditioner and making sure that it's fair trade so that everyone along the way gets money. But that's because if you do take the US dollar to some of these places, they are highly impactful, when you convert that money. And so I think a lot about also just like natural law and just finding analogs in the animal kingdom. And we consume in ways that just like aren't ethical. I was thinking about this the other day. Like, we're predaceous, I get it. Things are going to die when we consume because that's just who we are as individual biological species.
Yeah.
I don't find any other animal that kills and whatever it leaves harms the environment that it's in as much as we do. Like polar bears kill, and trust me, you don't want to be killed by a polar bear. It's a gruesome death.
Yeah.
And there's so many foxes, so many birds, so many things that depend on that polar bear to kill because they cannot kill a caribou, but they can easily benefit from that caribou's carcass.
Yeah.
What we leave behind is not consumable by anything else. And so if that's the case, like, why are you trying to essentially predate on things that aren't part of a cycle, and don't support a bigger cause? Like, I think a lot of people are scared to say that like we're a big polar bear and other countries and other citizens are like lesser animals. But the idea is energy exchange. Like, if we are so dominant in the economic sphere, then like we should be creating ripple effects that also result in prosperity for others. And that's not that hard to understand nor really implement. It just means that you're going to take less prosperity because the ripples have to go out to other people. Yeah.
It simply just requires more effort is the main point, it seems like. Because you're right in that, as a species, humans don't really leave behind anything in the wake of their death, or destruction of things, anything usable by any other species. I mean, when you look at the deforestation of the Amazon, there's no real, there's nothing left. There's no silver lining to that, So yeah, I see what you're saying there. Let's I see what you were saying when you were saying that everything seems to come back to what were the three things you said? The environment,
yeah. Nature, family, spirit. That's my three things always.
All right. Well, we've talked about nature. I'll let you pick. Would you prefer to talk about family or spirit?
I mean, for me, those both go hand in hand. Like, I think all of those go hand in hand for me because that's just, you need to survive nature. You do so by your chosen or blood family. Mm-hmm. And some of the decisions you make are driven by spirit because, like, I will give you an example. Like, I was in college studying biology, and the entire time had not worked in a single lab or done anything scientific career-wise, mm-hmm. not even at school. The entire time I was working in art as a poet. Mm. On faith and principle alone, I was like, I don't want to give up either one of these. Both of these have such a calling to me. But I was truly concerned that I was like, who's going to hire a science major with no science experience, right? Yeah. And so it was really disheartening because I was like, great, I just wasted all this time if I'm eventually just going to work in art. Lo and behold, I had started doing events, and somewhere along the way started hanging out with people who were working in arts and nature and that intersection. And then they got wind of what I was doing and who I was. And we just started making friends. Like, I hadn't even really combined arts and science at that point the way that I have now. And then through that connection, just talking about my identity as a Mexican person, as a queer person, they were just like, we want you here. And then that led me to combining environmentalism and arts and using arts as an advocacy tool for environmentalism, and then really connecting culture, everything else, and being really critical about all the intersections, and then just putting it into a poem so that people can understand it easier versus a 2-hour seminar.
Right.
And then that was what really solidified like the hybrid life that I live now, of which I would have never known. Right. And that was just on like spirit alone. A lot of that came from the dedication from the doubt that I got from my family at the point. Because my family did not believe that you could be a working artist, as labor, pretty much class people from Mexico, immigrants here, working with your hands, working by degree, or like by education was the only thing that I'd seen. So working by creativity and inspiration alone was something that they were like, that's not logical. Hence going to science, right? Yeah. And it was through those years of them being like, get a real job. Poetry's not a job. You can't continue teaching workshops. You can't just do gigs. You're not even getting paid for a lot of these. And that was like early on, to where finally when I got to that like crucial point of meeting those people, I had really established myself as an artist, got a reputation in the community, developed my own creativity and artistry to the point that my reputation had backing to it. Like, it wasn't just people liked me because of my long hair or whatever. Like, no, I had talent, which I had to spend years cultivating, as much as I was spending years cultivating a background in science and an education in science. So like, it was through a lot of the doubt that they had that I was like, no, I need to do this. This is something that I want to do. Like, forget what your family says. I know like it's always listen to family, but I kind of thank them now, because had it not been for their doubt, there would have been no motivation really, because I kind of was spurred on by like, you can't do it. So I was like, watch me then. But that's like a good idea for me of how to like capture spirit and family. Yeah. And now my family is highly supportive of it, right? Like, I can't blame them for having doubt. Like, I was the first person in the family who decided to pursue arts as a career. Right. And now they see what I've done and they're like, wow, like, that's something that like spurred them. And I can say pretty confidently to go after their own dreams, different dreams than mine, but being like, oh, wow, you made something out of nothing. They're like, okay, cool.
I see what you're saying, and I think it speaks to the importance of, humanities educations, arts educations, also for, STEM majors, people who are in those more academic, more rigid studies. I'm kind of the same way, honestly, because I'm a musician, but my degree is in a more technical topic. I'm in more of the technological audio aspects of it, and I feel like it gives a good balance, especially when you factor in like societal things, humanities types things, philosophy, current events, things like that. Because, when you're a scientist, you can't just, when you're when you're thinking of things to do in science, you have to have a good knowledge of how it will impact people. You can't just go around doing whatever because it could be a good experiment or a good thesis or a good hypothesis or whatever. You have to like know,
justify it.
Yeah. And so I think your experience speaks to the importance of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's why the whole STEAM movement was born.
Right.
I think a lot of what was happening during the upcoming or post-industrial revolution, a lot of people don't understand the influence of arts in those times.
Yeah.
But like all the fancy advertisements and the like, you can do it. Like, I forget what her name is, but the lady who's like flexing her arm.
Right.
That's art.
Yeah.
Right. Martin Luther King's speech. That's art. That's writing.
Yeah.
Right. Like a lot of these crucial moments have like a backbone of art where a lot of people don't necessarily understand the complexity of what it takes to like do that.
Yeah.
You know, not anyone can just make an iconic image, right? There has to be certain aspects and elements of like, aesthetics and balance and proportion and like all these things that have to appeal to the human eye.
Right.
That like someone has to be able to tune into and be like, someone will like this.
Yeah.
And so it's really, I think you hit it right on the money that like the loss of that importance and that value in our education system. Because even like what you do, combining the music and the audio engineering, like at beginning of shows like this, little tunes that like cue people's memory to be like, I'm listening now to Sacred Voices.
Right.
Right. Like those things matter because it pulls people into different headspaces, which is so influential nowadays. Like if I'm, again, caught in the menagerie of work, school, life, friends, family,
right,
I need something to like cue my brain to be like, put that down. We are now listening to this, which is art.
Yeah. People a lot of the time don't realize how much art they consume on a daily basis without consciously realizing it. Music when you're on hold on the phone or in an elevator or walking through a store or seeing, advertisements, billboards in magazines, on TV. Even if they are annoying commercial consumerism, it is, based in art. Yeah,
like if they caught your attention, they caught your attention on the artistic basis. Whether it's important to you depends on what they're advertising.
Right. I would love to talk at length about this, but unfortunately we're on the verge of wrapping up here. So as a final little bit, I'd like to ask you if you have any words of inspiration or encouragement or advice for the upcoming generation of poets and artists in general.
Yeah, I think one of the things I wish that I had learned is understand the spectrum of things. That I think a lot of us, we understand that there's more than two options to life, for sure, but I don't think we understand the multitude. Like there are thousands upon thousands of options to life. And if there isn't one that you like, you can literally create it, that is always an option. Like option, just make it.
That's great advice, and I hope that people take it to heart. You have been listening to Sacred Voices on KGNU. I would like to point out that Sacred Voices will be at Denver Open Media's Studio A for our monthly open mic, the fourth Friday of the month, which this month is on the 24th, and that is at 6:30 p.m. If you would like more information, please visit us online at sacred-voices.org. My name is Astin. Franklin, thank you for coming by.
Thank you.
And I will see you all next time.